Thief, philanthropist, promoter of democracy and liberal values, destroyer of tradition, speculator, visionary, loved by some, hated by others. All of this describes George Soros, one of the most controversial figures of the late 20th and early 21st century. And all of it is probably at least partially true. However, how did Soros become the figure we know today? In British collective memory, Soros will remain as the man who brought down the British pound and single-handedly broke the British monetary system in one day, while pocketing over $1 billion. So, how did this happen? To answer this question, we need to go a bit further back into the history of the 20th century. In 1945, Europe was devastated. 2 world wars completely destroyed the human and material infrastructure of the continent. European leaders of that time were driven by the idea that such a catastrophe must not happen again, as if it did, Europe would cease to exist. After World War II, there was a strengthening of political and economic ties among European countries. The idea was simple: to create a socio-economic context where war would no longer be in anyone's interest, politically or economically. This led to the creation of a common market that would eventually lead to a common European currency. As a mechanism for regulating exchange rates, the exchange rate mechanism, ERM, was established in 1979. The exchange rate was fixed to the German mark, the currency of the strongest economy on the continent. The idea was to regulate the exchange rate rather than leaving it to the free market. However, as often happened in European history, it was challenging to overcome individual national interests. Many countries were reluctant to abandon their own currencies. Neoliberal economic policies in deregulation were emerging, led by figures like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, strongly advocated leaving the exchange rate to the free market. Other European countries preferred a more stable monetary policy. The 1980s passed without Britain joining the ERM system as Thatcher's political power peaked in the country. However, in 1990s, under the influence of John Major, who would become the future Prime Minister of Britain, the UK entered the ERM system. The agreement was that Britain would maintain the pound within a range of 2.78 to 3.13 against the German mark. Let's remember these numbers, as it will prove important later on. The early 1990s were a time of British prosperity, and it seemed like a good decision to join the ERM. However, in 1992, a global recession occurred, and economic conditions in Britain changed. Inflation and unemployment worsened, and Britain found itself limited in managing its currency due to the previous agreement. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, George Soros was managing his quantum hedge fund. Hedge funds often deal with investing in business ventures, often risky ones. Understanding the situation and minimizing risks differentiate good hedge fund managers from bad ones. And George Soros knew what he was doing at that moment. Simultaneously, information emerged about the overvaluation of the British pound, indicating that it was worth less than its stated value when it entered the ERM system. The first pieces of information came from Germany. Statements about the overvaluation of the pound and its inevitable devaluation kept pushing its value down. Soros was aware of the situation and waited for the right moment. The crucial moment came on September 16th, when the president of the German Bundesbank stated in an interview, "It was not impossible for 1 or 2 currencies to come under pressure if there were further adjustments and cuts in German interest rates." At that moment, Soros realized that once people lose faith in the value of the pound, it will collapse. As the pound was consistently hovering around the lower limit of the agreed value range compared to the German mark, Soros understood that the pound could only go down, not up. In other words, in worst-case scenario, he could break even, but he could not lose money. And that's when he took action. Soros correctly assessed the reaction of the British government. If he started buying and selling large amounts of pounds, it would trigger reactions from other investors, and the British government would have to intervene to rescue the pound, making the situation worse. But what did Soros actually do? Through cycles of borrowing and selling pounds, knowing that their value could only fall, he set off a vicious circle where he profited from the difference in value, and the British government's every move further devalued the pound. But let's go a bit deeper. Imagine you're borrowing a stock. You're gonna give back the same stock with interest. But you know something other people don't. You know the stock value is going to fall very soon. You borrow it, and immediately you sell it for $100. Soon, the stock value drops to $90. Immediately, you buy it again. You still have the stock and you just made $10. Sounds like a good deal. And now you do it again, and again, knowing that each time the stock value will fall a bit further. Not only that, other investors will do the same, and the stock value will keep collapsing. Basically, that's what Soros did. It's called short selling. Soros and his team took a massive speculative position by short selling the British pound. Short selling involves borrowing a currency at its current value, selling it at that value, and then repurchasing it at a lower value to return to the lender, pocketing the difference as profit. He also kept openly expressing his bearish sentiments towards the pound, which drew media attention and fueled further speculation. But wait, if value of the pound falls, Britain will have to exit the ERM agreement it recently joined. The British Prime Minister John Major, who had staked his political reputation on entering the agreement, clearly did not want to leave it. However, this was a battle that Britain could not win, and eventually it withdrew from the agreement. The British pound plummeted by 25% against the US dollar. At the same time, George Soros made over $1 billion in just a few days. His success in betting against the pound on Black Wednesday earned him the nickname "the man who broke the Bank of England." However, it's essential to know that Soros was not the sole reason for the pound's decline. He was just one of the prominent investors who exploited the economic situation and speculative opportunities. The pound's overvaluation and the UK's decision to join the ERM with unsustainable exchange rate were the underlying factors that contributed to the currency's fall. And while Soros was experiencing his days of glory, the damage caused to the British economy was ultimately paid by British taxpayers. In the end, this is how Wall Street economics functions. There is no value produced. If someone wins, someone else has to lose. So what's the lesson of the story? The events of Black Wednesday demonstrate the complexity of financial markets and the difficulty of predicting and controlling their movements. The actions of the UK government and its decision to peg the pound to the ERM and defend the fixed exchange rate played a crucial role in the outcome. This event emphasizes the importance of sound economic policies and the need for governments to be aware of the potential risks of such monetary arrangements. Overall, the lessons from this event revolve around the importance of responsible financial behavior, the need for careful economic policies, and recognition that financial decisions can have far-reaching effects on economies and individuals alike. It also underscores the importance of ethical considerations in the world of finance.